And welcome back to America Can We Talk. I'm so happy we are joined in the studio this evening by Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and frequent guest on the show, and just love having him here. And there are so many, he just is a fount of knowledge in many subjects. And before we get to foreign policy, which I do want to get to, we'll talk about Obamacare for a minute.
That was a big thing from last week that kind of just got blown over.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, being the executive director over at the National Center for Policy Analysis, that's one of the big things that we look at is healthcare. And, of course, when you have this bombshell report that Aetna is, 2018, they're going to pull out of all the Obamacare exchanges, what I find just completely unconscionable is how the Democrat Party is blaming the Republicans for the collapse of the thing that they pushed through back in 2010, 2009. But really, Debbie, what we have to come to understand is that Obamacare was meant to collapse. It's a fait accompli. I learned that from my wife. She's a real smart lady. But it was meant to be because they really want to go to a single-payer system. And that's what the undertones you hear is that, we can't we tried to do this public-private partnership thing, but those mean old insurance companies like Aetna, Humana, United Healthcare, let's see who's the other, Anthem, and in Iowa, Medica.
Yep. Yes.
They're all pulling out. They're all dropping. Well, guess what? They're losing money because the entire proposition that they proposed was, to have healthier people pay for the sicker people instead of focusing on that contingent, that subcategory is not a viable course of action. And they had written in the Obamacare the risk corridor, which meant that the insurance companies would get a taxpayer-funded bailout. Well, when they lost the House and they lost the Senate, the Republicans weren't going to do that bailout. So when I hear Nancy Pelosi blaming the Republicans for this, who is the party of the big insurance companies? They were the ones that set the insurance companies up to say that everyone has to buy this commodity. Everyone has to buy your product. But now that trap door that they were supposed to, even if they fell through, would they be covered? It's not happening.
Exactly. And I'm glad Lieutenant Colonel Alan West brought up a point. I want to be sure you'd seen this story. There was actually a whole year ago, Aetna made a pretty big announcement about they were withdrawing their insurance from Obamacare insurance exchanges in 69% of the counties or 11 of 15 states. And this was a year ago. And now they're basically saying
we're out completely.
We're out. And so you have a big insurer. And here in Texas, we've had many insurers pull out. The point of all this being the major insurance companies, they're not pulling out of the Obamacare exchanges because they're mean or because they're selfish. It's because the math doesn't work.
It doesn't.
And if the math doesn't work, it's like I made an analogy to a friend of mine who just was complaining the insurance companies have so much money. They are selling a product like any other product. Insurance policy is a product. It's like if someone said to you, you have to sell your house and all that guy can afford is $20. So you have to sell it to him for $20. You say, I can't do that because the house is worth more than that.
Yes. And you put yourself out of business. You're not competitive.
Yep. So here we are. And I'm glad you made this point. I want to kind of segue into the bigger picture because it's very true that Obamacare was written to fail. It was designed to fail because, many people on the left, including Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, have in the past expressed they really wanted single payer, which is socialized medicine. They want single payer.
Harry Reid said it.
Yes. Yeah, many of them. And so here we are. The model they created is failing as intended. The Republicans aren't about to bail it out with taxpayer dollars. So we're at this crossroads in America. We're watching Obamacare imploding. And where the bill now sits is the House tried to do a full repeal. They couldn't get it through. They have a half-baked, messy repeal they passed. It's sitting over in the Senate.
Who says they're going to start from scratch?
Yeah. So what we need, in my opinion, is we need some leaders on the conservative side to say, look, this is bigger than, can we keep the 26-year-olds on your parents' insurance? Can we keep the pre-existing condition people? Can we keep this? Can we stop this? It does need, in some ways, to be started from scratch with the idea, just remove the whole bill and then start with the free market health care with legislation at the federal level directed at people who cannot afford their own care.
And therein lies the point. Obamacare, if you truly understand and define it very simply, it was about tax and welfare. It was massive tax increases, 20 new taxes, and it was an expansion of Medicaid because that's what the left believes, Medicaid for all, and that is a failing proposition. Medicaid is meant for those people at or below the poverty level. You do not want to say that our economy is so failing we're going to put everyone on Medicaid. And then you also have the issue of those people with quote unquote pre-existing conditions. So how do you take care of those people that are in this little segment that they're above that poverty line, so they don't qualify for the Medicare, but yet they're below that point where they can really afford, good quality health insurance? There are many different things you can do. You can use the health savings accounts and expand those. You can use tax credits where they can actually, put on their tax form, the insurance that they had to pay for. If they're not getting insurance through an employer, they're out there in the private market. And that solves that for that group of people. Then you look at what you want to do for the folks with pre-existing conditions. And that is a different type of category where you can establish the risk pools, and that takes care of that. You work with the insurance companies and define the risk pools so people are always covered. That's all that has to be done. All of these other things, these taxes and the 26-year-olds and these other machinations, they make no sense whatsoever.
And they don't work, as we're now discovering. No. So, I mentioned the show before that Daniel Horowitz on Conservative Review he had a long piece, I'm going to post it again, of numerous free market things perfectly permissible and available. Some would require legislation, but there's no reason not to have that legislation that could meet many of the needs that we have in the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. We have, you're mentioning pre-existing conditions, people who need help in some way paying for their health care. But the thing is, what I love about it and hate about it at the same time is it gets you to the root of the difference in people's political ideology in America. On the left, what they want to do is control everything. It is inherent in the leftist mindset.
That's the socialist mind.
Yes.
It's government control of everything. It's redistribution of wealth, nationalizing of production. You see that playing out in Venezuela. And oh, by the way, another thing, when was the last time you saw Sean Penn and Oliver Stone and Harry Belafonte and all these guys running down to Venezuela and talk about how great everything is now? They don't do that anymore. But what the left wants in the United States of America when it comes to health care is a VA system all over the country. Now,
Picture that.
Now, think about it. You don't hear the left getting upset about the VA medical system. The only person that passed without a single dissenting vote was the VA Secretary, Dr. David Shulkin. First of all, first person to be head of the VA, never served in the military. Second of all, he was head of the Veterans Health Administration under Obama. And now, all of a sudden, he is in charge of the entire VA system. And the fact that this gentleman went up and no one even paid attention to it, he had not a single vote against him in his confirmation, that tells you something about what the Democrats think. And that tells you something about him. He is not going to fix the VA whatsoever.
It tells you something about the Republicans. They are afraid to stand up for these really tough ideas that the VA is a mess. This guy apparently, his mindset is not going to fix it. But I don't know why the Republicans let that one go. I
don't know why Donald Trump nominated this guy to be the head of his VA. This is the guy that was head of the VA in the Obama administration when all these scandals were going on. Why would you put him in charge of the entire Veterans Administration system when he was screwing up the Veterans Health Administration?
It's a very good question. I'm going to post something. I want to urge you to read this. It's called With the AHCA, which is the new bill that House Republicans passed. Americans must choose between socialism and liberty. And this is the hard thing because it's so easy for the left to say, we're so concerned about pre-existing conditions. We're concerned about the poor. Let us help. Let us take care. It's emotional, and it is. And for many people, you think, well, gee, I do know so and so who's got a pre-existing condition, and I want to make sure he or she has coverage. And the messaging on the right requires intellectual comprehension. It requires laying out factual proposals. The things you just said, and we don't.
You got to narrow it down.
Yeah, you got to narrow it down, and you've got to be able to re-inspire people to see this is a bigger question than just healthcare, because it has that dumbing down the American mentality mindset where you're not that can-do, self-reliant American spirit. You're more of that. Can you just take care of us?
Look,
spirit?
Debbie, last year in January, I was diagnosed with sick sinus syndrome. That meant that my heart rate was incredibly low because the electro signal that's supposed to go from the sinus node telling my heart to beat was not happening. I was getting down to a heart rate of 20, and it stopped actually in a 24-hour period 6 times for 2 to 3 seconds. I don't want to be in a healthcare system that says, hey, Colonel West, you're going to have to wait, maybe a year for you to get your pacemaker implanted. I was diagnosed late January. I got my pacemaker put in March of last year. I feel great. But it was because we have a system that I am part of, I pay into, and I am incentivized to live a healthy lifestyle because of that.
Absolutely. Okay, we're down to 10 seconds here in this segment. When we come back, there's much more to say in the healthcare system, but while I have Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, I want to talk about what's happening in Iran, North Korea, with Abbas, the Palestinians. So many topics, so little time. Don't go away. Welcome back to America Community Talk. We're joined in studio tonight, if you're just tuning in, with Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. So glad to have him here. And we can go a lot of directions, but I do want to turn to the international scene. As I was saying at the start of the show, all we've heard in the news for a week. You would think nothing happened in America except for Trump fired Comey, but actually a lot of big things happened. And I want to start with the fact that Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority, visited with Trump in Washington, and that Donald Trump, I think it's this Friday, he's leaving for his first international thing. Yeah. So Mahmoud Abbas is the head of the Palestinian Authority, and in a most summary way, I will just tell you that he actually wrote his doctoral thesis, I think it was in 1982, and published in 84, pretty much denying the Holocaust. So, also, big thing, saying there were no gas chambers at Auschwitz. That was made up, and saying essentially that, I mean, just crazy stuff. And so, and he's the head of the Palestinian Authority that is just an endless thorn in Israel's side. So we were talking on the break. Do you think that Trump should have met with him?
No, I would not have, because it's not the Palestinian Authority, it's Fatah, which is really a cleaned up way of saying Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was the initial Islamic terrorist group under Yasser Arafat. You know, we need to see some things from Mr. Abbas, also known as Abu Mazen, that shows that he is serious about recognizing the Jewish state of Israel and their existence. We know that the recent UNESCO vote that was about not recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the Palestinian Authority was behind that. So, and Abbas has been praising a lot of these knife attacks that have been going on against the Jewish citizens, and also the bus and car attacks. We know that they are funneling money to the families of terrorists and naming schools and what have you. And so I would just say, you know, I am not going to sit down and legitimize you and recognize you until you show that you are a serious leader. And, you know, a doctoral thesis like that, I mean, I would say you're unhinged. You are a Holocaust denier, which I think is a lot worse than climate change denying.
Yeah, a whole lot.
Yeah, and you're trying to revise history. So, you know, we can't be sitting around and giving a platform to people that should not have a platform.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel that way too. And I don't know if I were president, you feel like you're supposed to try to bring the parties together. And honestly, since time began, it seems like since biblical times, we've been trying to struggle with challenges between the Jewish people and others. But what happened when Trump was in Washington, when Mahmoud Abbas was here, was Trump actually asked, he said, if I can put together a triennial meeting, so Mahmoud Abbas, Netanyahu, and Trump, and it was announced that Trump saying that Abbas said, yeah, I would do that. And I feel concerned about that, because I feel like Donald Trump kind of thinks it's like the toughest deal ever or something. And the complexities and the hatred of millennia between those two peoples, I don't think it's going to be solved. And I'm not even sure it's wise to try until the Palestinians are more aware that America is going to strongly back Israel, and that they have to come to the talk with a different attitude.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things history teaches us, you got to understand where the word Palestine came from in the first place. It has nothing to do with the Arab people. It has everything to do with the response of Roman Emperor Hadrian to the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt by the Jewish people, when he declared that the region would no longer be called Judea, it would be called Palestina. And the root word of Palestina is Philistia, and that is based upon ancient Philistines who were Greeks. So this has nothing to do with this region, and this name now, this term has been hijacked by these nomadic Arabs who rejected the original two-state solution of Israel and Jordan. Okay, so I think that we need to have that recognition of history and recognition of what the United Nations had first declared back post-World War II, and we need to go from there. And everyone needs to come to the table and say, there is a Jewish state of Israel, and it has a right to exist.
Amen to that. I could not agree more. I want to throw in something else I was just reading about. So Caroline Glick, who's just a brilliant
marvelous
writer, and when I did I was so blessed to be able to do my show from Israel in February, and she came on the show with me. She has a piece out talking about just recent polling within the Palestinians. Recent polling, things like a mere 23% of Palestinians said they were certain Israel will continue to exist 25 years from now. 44% said no. I mean, I can't read you the whole, it gets boring, but she hit poll after poll after poll pulled together by someone at the Shalem College, essentially said, every poll will tell you the Palestinians do not agree Israel gets to exist. So you're negotiating with someone who thinks they should be able to destroy you and feels right saying that. And so it's an inane notion to think somehow you're going to be the toughest negotiator and fix it all.
And I think that President Trump needs to realize it may have been a great book dealing with businesses, The Art of the Deal, but he probably should read Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
You know what? I love it. That's such a good point. Okay, because we only have 6.5 or 7 minutes, I guess. Okay, I want to turn your attention on foreign policy to Iran. And you probably are aware that we had the Iranian deal, so we solved all problems with Iran. You remember that? But,
yeah, right.
But we did have testimony just this week by the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, testifying to Congress, saying essentially that Iran is refining its nuke delivery system. They are refining their intercontinental ballistic missiles, and essentially saying the Islamic Republic would choose ballistic missiles as its preferred method of delivering nuclear weapons. He's trying to raise Congress's awareness that we are facing an Iran who, in fact, the nuclear deal that Obama struck with them, it carved out ICBMs. They weren't even part of it. Right?
Well, the thing is, Iran is not supposed to be launching and testing any type of ballistic missile for, I believe, 8 to 10 years. And then you have conventional weapon systems that they're not supposed to be dealing with in the near term, I think 3 to 5 years. But this is the bottom line. There's a collusion. You want to talk about real collusion. There's a collusion between Iran and North Korea. People tend to forget that I believe it was back in 2007, 2008, that the Israelis bombed a Syrian nuclear facility that was very similar to the North Korean nuclear facility in Yongbyon. And we know that the North Koreans were there working in Syria. Now, who do you have in Syria now? You have the Iranians, the Quds Force, you have Hezbollah, you have the Iranian Revolutionary Guards forces working there. So what we're seeing is, transitioning from the point about Netanyahu and Israel, they have a threat, a very serious threat that is there to their north, with Iran being within spitting distance, developing the ballistic missile capability. They have already bought the incredibly vicious S-300 surface-to-air missile system from the Russians, and they are putting those at their nuclear facilities in Iran. And who's to say that they won't put those in Syria as well? And so the window is closing for the world to be able to do something against this. And Debbie, if George Santayana said those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, there are so many similarities to 1930s that are happening right now. So many.
We have been on this topic before. I'd love to jump off on it again. Actually, we haven't talked about that in a while. But I will say what Dan Coates, which is the Director of National Intelligence, was trying to say in Congress in his testimony this week is that observing what Iran is doing, they are developing, they claim, only for the purpose of nuclear energy and technology goals. What they're pursuing gives them the capability to build missile-deliverable nuclear weapons if it chooses to do so. So Iran, the single largest terror exporting country in the world, is preparing this. This is after the ridiculous treaty that Obama negotiated with them, whenever that was, 2014. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're looking at a dangerous world with Iran. And then you were alluding to the similarities of 1930. So yeah, we still have 4 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, when you look and see how everyone saw what Adolf Hitler was doing in Germany, but they thought they could compromise, they could appease, they could negotiate with him. The Munich Accords, which Chamberlain signed with Hitler, which ended up being, as Hitler said, nothing but a piece of paper. And we saw all the encroachment into the Rhineland, into the Sudetenland, into Austria. And we continued to try to compromise, appease, and negotiate until it was, pretty much so over. And I think that's exactly where we are today. The fact that you had the new South Korean president that was just recently elected, Moon Jae-in, And he said that he is going to look for more, open, discussion and negotiation. Well, we just had this past weekend North Korea pop off another ballistic missile that landed, within 60 miles of the Russian mainland. So we are seeing all of these belligerent actions, but yet we're not doing anything about it. And remember this, in the national security strategy of Iran about 2 years ago, they specifically mentioned electromagnetic pulse as something that they could use against the United States. So all you have to do is get that technology on a ballistic missile and fire it off in the atmosphere. And finally, we're starting to get people to talk about that up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I think actually, as a slight segue, right here in Texas, I believe it finally passed the Senate for the first time to get protection for the Texas grid, which almost all of Texas is under one grid.
Yeah, we're a solo grid system. We're not on the East Coast or West Coast. And so, when you think about all the economic activity, you think about the fact you got the world's largest military installation right here in Texas at Fort Hood. Look at the defense contractors that are here in Fort Worth. This is a very important thing for us to have. Those parallels in the 1930s, I know people hear things like that and they think, well, come on, the world learned a lesson. We don't want World War. The world will never learn that lesson. There's always the need for those who are Read Machiavelli's The Prince.
Yeah. Astute students of history like Lieutenant Colonel Allen West and people who just are willing to look at the world with their eyes open, not just have a kind of a Pollyanna, well, I don't think they want to do that.
Not kumbaya.
No, yeah. Okay, so now we only have a minute left, but I want to ask about North Korea. So, yeah, they fired a missile. That was either this morning or last night that landed.
Late Saturday night, early, Sunday morning for us. Uh-huh.
Okay, so what if you're Trump and you are advising him? What do you do about North Korea? I mean, get China involved a little bit, but what are you going to do about him?
Well, if China were involved, they would not be firing off these ballistic missiles. But China's still building, military islands and what have you. So I don't think China's doing anything. What we need to be doing is sitting down talking with the South Korean president. We need to have that THAAD system that's in place.
Yep.
And I think eventually one of these missiles is going to have to be shot down.
Oh, let us hope. I did want to ask you what you thought about the friendly gesture from the new South Korean president. I'm not sure his name. You just said it, but
yeah, Moon Jae-in.
Yeah, we have 40 seconds here, but is that a bad sign that he's wanting to collaborate with the North or talk to the North a little bit?
Yeah, it's a bad sign because once again, you're giving this guy the moral high ground. Remember that under Kim Jong-un, they have fired artillery onto South Korean islands. They have sunk a South Korean naval vessel, killing sailors. So this is a contentious situation. This guy's a psychopath.
Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, just love having you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.